welcome back to the Learning Happy Hour. Today's episode is on building your home lab. First, Patrick and myself wanted to do a little introduction. This is our second episode running the Learning Happy Hour. So, to start the episode off, I'm going to ask Patrick his career history and how he got started with Palo Alto Networks and in cybersecurity in general. So, Patrick, let's go ahead and answer these questions.
Thanks. Yeah. So I got out of the Navy about 1997, actually, way back when, so long ago now. And I had the intention of getting into computers. That's all I knew. I knew I wanted to do something computer related. And the job I took, I was actually watching the network administrator, and I was really curious as to what he was doing. So I ended up talking to him, and then I ended up really kind of just shadowing him. And then he gave me some work to do and little things, and I just started to learn. In the meantime, I bought a second computer at home, networked them, and started to learn on my own. And learned how to build a server and client server. And in fact, it's funny, I didn't even have a switch; it was all just coax and directly connected. But through a connection during that time, I ended up getting hired as a network administrator, which was mostly server related. But as it turned out, they had me do everything. I actually had to design it, so I had to put in switches and a router and a firewall and all that. So I gained all that experience, which then eventually I got hired as a network engineer, and that started that. So that was 1998 or so. And, by 1999, I was working as a network engineer. And so I did that for many, many years. Actually did some instruction, did some sales engineering for different things. So I worked in a lot of areas. 2016, I got a call out of the blue from Palo Alto Networks, and I'd been using the firewall for about not quite 2 years at that point, so I was already impressed with the product. So I was pretty excited about them calling me because their reputation had preceded them. And so actually had a couple interviews, flew out, talked to them, did a presentation as an instructor, and got hired. And so that was now almost 3.5 years ago.
Great.
It's been fantastic. I love working for him.
So your current role is a instructor. So I guess what's your favorite part about doing that today?
Favorite part, I think, is interacting with different customers, different people. I also, I would have to say that there's a part of this that I'm a little biased to, but I also am in charge of the veterans training program.
Nice.
So I also work with veterans programs, different groups, and I teach. Palo Alto Networks actually offers free training to veterans, and
Wow.
I teach those classes as well. So,
cool.
So that might be my favorite, just because it's a way to sort of support my my fellow soldiers and sailors and Marines and everybody. But
Awesome.
Airmen, let's not leave those out. But yeah, so I think it really is getting to know the partners and the customers, and really kind of getting to. It's really fun to go into a room where people are brand new and help them start to really understand the concepts. One of the things that I'll just do a quick example is network address translation. A lot of people get hung up on that for some reason, especially when it comes to destination net. We might want to do something on that later in some episode.
Yeah, sure.
But, I remember teaching that and having people walk away going, oh, I didn't understand it the way that it's implemented. I didn't really get it, and now I really do. So that's the kind of thing that's really rewarding, is being able to really teach and help people realize the capabilities that are there. One last thing about this was that I managed the firewall for, like I said, almost 2 years, and I went into I had to take the class before I taught it, and I sat in training, which I'd never had. And I remember thinking, ooh, there's a few things here that I really wish I would have known. I didn't really understand, and
it's funny you say that.
Better. Yeah.
It's funny you say that, because I've had the same experience.
Yeah.
So for the viewers, my name is Luke Teeters. I'm what they call systems engineer for Palo Alto Networks. And basically what that means is I get accounts that I cover, and I also help them with their firewalls and other Palo Alto Networks products. And I agree with you. There's something to say about walking into a room and talking to someone and teaching them something, walking away from that conversation with something to take away, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I was in the same position. So in my career, just a quick, history is I was given the opportunity to work at a startup company when I was younger, which was, at the time, I didn't understand what I walked into, but looking back, it was a really great experience for me. I got to touch a lot of things there, and that really developed my interest in networking. So very similar to yours, I did a lot of networking for a few years, and eventually that turned into cybersecurity. And again, back to your story, is an opportunity came up at Palo, and that's basically how I ended up here. Cybersecurity is something I always have gravitated towards.
Right.
And I've been in school for several years, and I'm currently actually in grad school for cybersecurity. All right, so enough about us. Let's talk about how to build your own home lab. So I guess the question is, how do you get started? And we do have a few talking points. So I guess the first would be hardware. So in your experience of building a home lab, how do you get your hands on hardware? What's some of those methods?
Well, so things have changed quite a bit, and I remember. So for me, certification was huge. It still is very important, but back in the day, there was no degree, to get with this. So everything was about certification. So it was getting your hands on whatever you could to learn, whether that was getting like say Microsoft NT at the time, or in server, or getting a hold of a Cisco, and it was all hardware. So that was the biggest thing, was that there was a real business on eBay of selling used equipment and things. So yeah, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I spent a lot of money on trying to find devices I could purchase online, and then also you had to get a hold of licensing. So it was really difficult to get all of this, and sometimes you found things in ways that maybe weren't quite so on the up and up. So it was really difficult, but now it's changed quite a bit, and virtualization, obviously industry wise was a game changer, but from a perspective of what you can do on your own, just a massive game changer, because now all of a sudden you could get a hold of a little bit of hardware and then run a lot of things. So there was emulators, all these different things we would try and use, and now much easier. So
even Raspberry Pis these days, right? You can get
yeah.
your hands on a Raspberry Pi for relatively cheap. I mean, I guess it depends on where you are. So we're in North America. I guess it just really depends on where you're at. So
yeah, I've got
North
one
America,
that I think I spent about $100. I think less than that, so it wasn't bad.
Yeah, so my story is, I have, hardware wise, I actually have a server. It's actually running in my basement. Some things you need, things you need to consider with your hardware is your power and that sort of thing, as well as where you're going to get it. So fortunately, in my case, I had a peer that was able to give me one that he had. So I guess hardware is interesting, but software is just as interesting. So software,
Right.
There's a lot of authorization keys. Are you running an eval key? Are you running like a lab key? That sort of thing.
Right.
So software, at least in my experience, make friends with your local account team. Maybe they can get you some lab software, maybe demo gear. But there are a lot of open source technologies in this day and age. So in my home lab, I do have some Linux open source tools running that I can actively use for testing, right? So
Right.
there's a lot of pen test tools and that sort of thing. So I guess the other area is cloud. So cloud is a whole other conversation when it comes to lab, right? So
Right.
me personally, I have an AWS instance, and I spin it up when I would like to run it, and I spin it down, because if we all know, if you leave that on,
Yeah.
it's still spinning cycles, and you have to pay for that.
Exactly.
So I guess anything to add to these topics?
Well, I was going to say, the cloud thing, and that is the way to do it, honestly, is you either can get a hold of some, evaluation licensing and things like that, or, you spin up, spin down. But I recommend doing that, because especially, so if you're someone who's in cybersecurity, or someone who wants to be in cybersecurity, there is no escaping cloud security at this point. It's all moving to that end. So it's something that you're going to want to have experience on. Now, when it comes to what you said about getting a hold of your account team, That is something as a network engineer I learned early on, and every time that I went through a process of purchasing equipment, whenever I sat down with whichever vendor it was, and I'm gonna punch sales like, but I did this every time. I just said, okay, we know what we're looking at doing now. Training and lab equipment. What you got? And I would just basically kind of force them to sweeten the pot on it because I knew they'd have it. Now, sometimes, they don't always, they can't, they're not magicians, but there's usually always something that they can do or help out, even if it is just some training credits. But it
Yeah,
is something that really is very helpful. And I think that's the way to do it, because one of the questions I get all the time is, how do I get a home firewall from Palo Alto Networks? And, you can go online and purchase a used piece of equipment like a PA220, well, 200, right? Pretty inexpensively. But the problem is, that's not where the cost issue is. The cost issue is in the licensing. So getting that is really important, and that's where. And I think you can speak to this. I guess you tell me if I'm wrong, but in the sales side of things, especially when you're working with a customer, who is evaluating, buying our product for the first time, why wouldn't we want to incentivize this and give them the ability to start using it and working with it? So
exactly. Yeah, so I definitely agree with you there. So I guess the next question for the viewers and really the you and I is, where do we start, right? So hardware, software, cloud, you're on your own, right? You got to get your hands on it somehow. It's either
right.
going to be at work, it's going to be at your house. I've met a lot of guys that have crazy labs at their house. They have, some kind of crazy storage, or they store different, pictures and movies and all these different things. So once you're there, right, where do you start? Um, in my mind, you kind of have to scope it, right? If you don't have some kind of scope, you're just going to be buying random pieces of equipment, trying to hodgepodge, Frankenstein something together.
Right.
So, I guess my story is, for the longest time when I was working as a resident engineer for a company, I actually didn't want a home lab, believe it or not.
Oh,
When I
really?
left, I didn't want to come home to work. Eventually, I got to the point where I enjoyed starting to
Let's
lab
say
things
you're
out
about
that
to
I
lose
couldn't
your
do at
nerd
work.
cred on that one there.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, yeah. But I grew out of that, and now I'm definitely an advocate to have your own home lab, because that's the place to build, to break, and learn, right?
Right.
So as of the last few years, I scoped something out and built some diagrams. So the scope in my mind was, I wanted to have multiple networks. I wanted to do inter VLAN segmentation. I wanted to have something in place where I could build out some use cases. In my case, I do have a Palo Alto Networks Palo Alto Networks firewall in my lab, so I was able to start labbing up some of those use cases without impacting a production network.
Let me just for a second kind of back up on this, because you talk about scope, and here's the thing that I was thinking of, right? You as a cybersecurity professional, you have specific things that you want to do, right? You might start building a lab with the idea that, what, there's a problem I want to work out. I have a lab that I a lot of times will employ to teach with. So I will build scenarios in that I can then point to, that are things that are predefined, so I don't have to build them right there. But if you're new coming into it, then I think the scope needs to be, okay, you're trying to learn the basic principles. So I think what you're talking about too, especially from a cloud perspective, there's a lot of solutions out there, virtualization that are free. And you can have a router, and you can have, the basic building blocks of a network, and you could start from there. So it doesn't have to be this really complex thing. It
Yeah, I
can be
agree.
very basic, and for the most part, you really just have to cover the cost of the hardware that you're putting it on and the power to run it.
Yep.
Now, what we're talking about today a little bit is, with Palo Alto Networks, with what we can build and use in an environment to sort of test that solution, the Palo Alto Networks security platform. So with
Yep.
that, I wanted to kind of see what you've done in your lab and how you've built it, and the way you use it.
Sure. Before we bring up the diagram and show you and walk you through exactly what I've built in just a small home lab here, is I actually did spin up a PANOS instance in AWS, and I learned that process. That was very valuable to me
Yeah.
because I got to learn how NAT works up there, right? How elastic IPs work.
Right.
What does all the, these terms, this technology do? So I think I spend around $10 a month. I actually have an
Oh,
instance
really?
up there. And I think it's mainly for an elastic IP address because they
Right.
actually charge you to check it out. I'm using that for my egress NAT. So there's a lot of resources out there on the internet on how to do something like that. So getting back to the on-prem hardware side of things. So I'm going to walk you through my home lab. Basically, I have a internet connection, and that internet connection goes directly to a Palo Alto PA220.
Okay.
And it's funny you mentioned NAT because that's actually what is doing NAT for me. So I'm actually doing everything. That's the head end. That's doing the full NAT. I'm actually running Global Protect on that guy.
Okay.
What I ended up doing is actually that goes to ETH1, and then ETH2 I actually have a trunk onto a layer 3 switch. That layer 3 switch has multiple VLANs. So basically imagine traffic punts up to the gateway on a
Right.
sub interface, router on a stick, if you will,
Okay.
for the network segmentation. So I could basically have a workstation and a server talking to each other, but it has to go to the gateway, obviously, to route to the next network. And
Right.
that is actually zone to zone in the Palo. So I'm actually able to see the traffic, apply my security profiles, etc. I do have a layer 3 switch below that, and I actually have an access port that's connected to a wireless access point in bridge mode. So basically just advertising SSID. My clients connect to that. DHCP is handed off of PANOS, and that's basically what's serving the home network. Now, the home network, I don't take as much of a security posture towards. Like, I'm not
Right.
doing SSL decryption on my Apple TV at the house.
Yeah.
I don't want to make anyone in the house angry. So that's basically, for the home, but the lab is under the servers, the workstations, and then I have a management LAN. I do have a VM host, and it is running virtualized instances of servers. I'm running MindMeld, I'm running Panhandler, I'm running Expedition, all the tools that we've open sourced and released to the community. I'm running that so I could do testing. From there, that's basically the building blocks of an operational network. And some of the use cases I want to call out that I've been able to successfully implement is SSL decryption,
Right.
really get into the weeds there. And once I got there, I was then able to test my credential theft prevention. So I do have an Active Directory domain controller with users, right? So I can create a Patrick user. I can
Right.
log into a workstation. Then I can go to a web form and try to type your creds into that web form and actually watch the firewall prevent that with the credential theft prevention. So I'm able to lab
Nice.
up all these use cases that a lot of organizations are interested in, and actually have that, where the rubber hits the road, and actually
Right.
take videos and do that in a lab environment. A few other use cases I've been able to do is some automation, right? So we do have some dynamic tag ability.
Right.
Um, so one of those use cases is from your log forwarding profile, there's a built-in action area. So you could actually filter your logs. And if a filter is hit, you can take a built-in action, such as tagging. You tag a source IP address. Well,
Right.
now that's in a dynamic address group. You can reference the dynamic address group in a no decrypt profile. So what that means is if you hit a no decrypt, that device is now excluded from the decryption. So
Right.
little use cases like that really go a long way. Simple to configure, easy to set up and show. The last would be user ID, right?
Right.
Getting that up and operational, and then standard monitoring. Right? I do have an open source Linux based NMS, basically doing SNMP monitoring on my switch, my PANOS, my servers, that kind of stuff.
Nice. So yeah,
So
pretty comprehensive, but not necessarily. I mean, this is all pretty much running, virtualized with, and then you have your hardware router, or I mean firewall, excuse me, right?
yep, exactly, and it's
Yeah.
pretty basic, right? All these features. It's almost like a crawl, walk, run type of
Yeah.
situation because I set it up. I have my NAT, I have my routing, I have everything functional, and then I can start tacking on these use cases, right? Hey, Luke, how do I do this? I'm going to go configure it. I'm going to set it up. I'm going to take
Right.
some screenshots. I'm going to send you an email. I'm going to give you a video of how to do that. So it's really helpful for that education piece and how this technology works.
Yeah, and I would
So
say from my standpoint too, just from one of the things that, so when I teach classes, right, many of the attendees are looking to be certified, and one of the biggest things is getting the hands-on. So if you can get build an environment, even a basic environment, where you have some like even evaluation license, that kind of stuff, that will go a long way in getting you the hands-on you need to get that certification, because the information's out there. It's pretty easy to come by, but applying it is really what's going to help, because it's not the test is not really designed to be something you just memorize. It's going to give you some scenarios and things that you need to know, and hands-on is what's going to give that to you. So
yeah, and I've actually found most of my answers, well, all the answers really in the administrative guide of our products,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
So we have very well written administrative guides on how to configure this stuff. So I don't have to go tap anyone's shoulder. I just
Yeah.
bust open the admin guide and I can basically go from there and figure this stuff out. So that's really that. That's what I wanted to share with the group. The diagram, some use cases, that sort of thing.
Yeah, really
Um,
nice.
so basically, we wanted to close this episode with a couple more questions before we conclude.
Okay.
And the question is, if you could mentor your younger self, what would you say to do right away? Right, you're just getting into the industry. Maybe you're enrolling in college. Maybe you're taking a boot camp. Maybe you're enrolling into a class to get education on Palo Alto Networks or something like that. What would you say to your younger self?
Put down that game controller and go to bed. No. So I would say that one of the things would be, and it wasn't necessarily as available, I think, but I would have networked a little more. I think not so much for, I mean, you're always trying to, I think, especially in the beginning, it's many opportunities, but networking for gaining experience. That's something that I don't think I did enough of. I did a lot of learning on my own. So I think reaching out and sort of, finding those mentors, I had a couple here and there, but I don't think I did it as well as I could have. The other side of it too is I would have probably, I'd say go security earlier. I did not spend a lot of time in security. And I think once I got into cybersecurity, sort of looking back on my career, thinking, wow, there's a lot of times where I definitely could have benefited, and so could the organization I was supporting benefited from
Yeah.
better knowledge and security. I just didn't. I think I wasn't alone in this. I think a lot of us, you didn't really approach it from that standpoint. So I think getting to that earlier, understanding packet flow on that level, and the way it can be exploited.
Hindsight is
Definitely.
2020, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But for the most part, I think I want to say this though. I think I would also congratulate my young self for being very, taking advantage of every opportunity that kind of fell in my lap. Everything I kind of found, I pushed for, buying equipment and learning it and taking the time to do it on my off hours. It was definitely worthwhile. And I was primarily self-taught. So
Yeah. Okay.
it was up to
Great.
me.
Yeah. So I guess what I would tell myself is definitely, you kind of stole mine to a degree,
Oh
but
yeah.
definitely be bold, right? Be curious. So this day and age, there are a lot of groups, right? So you mentioned
Yeah.
networking. I was going to say the same, right? So definitely get involved in those local groups because it's actually more beneficial than you would think. You go to these groups, you meet guys, you meet gals that are in the industry that may work down the street, and it could be an opportunity. You never know. You
Yeah.
meet someone, you connect with them on social media like LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that. You follow these industry leaders. You mentioned a mentor. It's very similar in my career as well. I've looked up to some engineers that I definitely admired, and I liked what they had to say, and I liked their direction and that kind of thing. Cybersecurity is definitely an area, at least in 2020, where there's a lot of seats to fill in the
Right.
industry. So if it's something you're interested in, then there are a lot of opportunities out there for employment.
Let me ask you this. So let's say that I'm young kid, right? I just maybe just starting college, and I'm thinking about my career, and I do have an interest in this, but I don't really have a lot of experience. Uh, what kind of user group? I mean, if I went to one of those user groups you're talking about, what kind of reception would I get? Would it be overwhelming? Would I feel like I'm sort of out of place? What do you think?
So my personal opinion, so I'm a young guy, right?
Right.
Um, there are groups such as the Fuel user group.
Okay.
That is a group that Palo Alto Networks has a third party run a user group for Palo Alto Networks. We do have vendors, partners come in and show us their technology as well. It's not solely focused on Palo Alto Networks, but it's basically a technologist group of cybersecurity professionals, right? We do have entry level cybersecurity techs or someone interested in the field come to these types of meetings. They're all
Right.
over at least North America. In my country is there's groups, so
Right.
I think it,
Yeah.
it may be international, um, but there are major cities like so I'm in the Cleveland area of Ohio, and there is a group there. There's actually a group down in the Columbus area too, just a few hour car drive away.
Yeah. We have
um,
one. I'm in the Salt Lake City area in Utah, and we
Yeah,
have
so
one
that's
in Salt Lake
definitely a
City. So
group that I would recommend
yeah.
that you guys look into and try to get involved. But I don't think it would be, if you're not in the industry, it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to go to one of these types of groups and just shake some hands, get some free stickers and pens, and just
Yeah.
learn, right? They bring
I,
in speakers, they talk about technology, they talk about, stories, right? I did this big project, this is lessons learned, that type of thing. And typically at that point, you're meeting other people in the area, and that's really great for everybody, right? It's great for the entry guys, it's great for the hiring managers. Um, I guess the last thing I would say is there are definitely a lot of school programs. So I've been in
yeah.
school for 10 years, continuously taking courses. So that's another area. Kind of you get access to free licensing as a student. So that's another benefit there. But yeah, that's really it for me. Definitely just get involved, right? So it's kind of the same message from both of us.
Yeah, and I would just say this too. There are. I'll put these in the notes in the show, but there's a lot of there's some opportunities for. In fact, NetDev Group is a company that you can get lab environment. That's a Palo Alto Networks lab environment. $95 for 6 months, really inexpensive. And then
Wow.
there's veterans programs as well, and I'll put those in there. Groups like VetsinTech or Cybervets, to name
Yep.
just a couple. These are all there that provide the free training. You might even get to see me. But there's also a lot of, I mean, even beyond just Palo Alto Networks, there is so much training out there that's provided for veterans. So if you are a veteran, definitely take a look at that. I'll leave some notes as well. But there's quite a
Cool.
bit out there. I mean, so much so that I think it's almost unfair compared to what it was when I started. And I feel like if you don't take advantage of it, that's your own fault, because there's really no excuse at this point.
Sure. Hey, you know what? We'll also include the Fuel user group link at the end
Yeah.
of the video. And there's one other helpful resource that I wanted to include, and that is the PANOS guidance on the live community. A lot of customers come to us asking, hey, what's the latest stable build of your OS on the different platforms we offer? So we'll also include the PANOS guidance live community article link in the description below.
Sounds good. All right.
All right. And with that, that's it for this episode. We will be back with the next episode shortly, and we'll talk to you guys later.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye.